Hi, and welcome to the Bruce channel. I'm Bruce, and first thing, don't worry about it, it is preparation for a film roll. Alright, where to begin? Way too much on the docket today, partly because it's been busy, and partly because, unexpectedly and unavoidably, last week I lost my internet connection for several days at the end of last week. And although the show was largely assembled in concept, I didn't have the means to gather the materials, for that matter, to post it. So lots to cover, some of last week and some new. First, I felt amazingly impotent having no internet. It's hard to describe, but it's not that I couldn't stream videos. I've got books and, for that matter, DVDs, but it was really discomforting. It's hard to describe, really, but we become so used to being able to look things up at a moment's notice, even if it's arcane, if it's not arcane. If I want to know, a recipe to use onions, or what the name of Martha Washington's first husband was, thanks to the internet, I can do it, and we're spoiled like that. But without that ability, I felt weird is a good word, naked, unarmed. It was like playing chess with only 2 pawns and a bishop to protect my king. Anyway, it rather demonstrates just how far we've come and how fast, because 20 years ago I had internet, but it was email and bulletin boards, and in those intervening years I think we become inured to just how fast technology advances, which was a point well illustrated by Neil deGrasse Tyson in a video that I saw just recently. In it, he held up his iPhone. He said, if you'd shown this to someone just 15, 20 years ago, you'd have given them impetus for a host of new laws, like those of Old Salem and the anti-witch laws. Okay, so of course the lead story through last weekend was the death of Muhammad Ali. Pretty much everything that could be said was said, and it was all largely true. The timing was ironic because on our last show 2 weeks ago, I had predicted that the NFL would, in generations to come, go the way of professional boxing. That is still in existence, but occupying nowhere near the penetration in the public consciousness that it once did. Once upon a time, everybody knew the big names in boxing, whether past or present. Jack Dempsey, Mario Hansen, Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Patterson, Sugar Ray Leonard. And it may be somewhat ironic, but it was because of Ali, who went from graceful and loquacious to shaking and nearly incoherent. And maybe that's what caused boxing to lose its luster, because the decline in his health and in its luster largely coincided. As far as boxing itself, he may actually have been the greatest. In his prime, you couldn't hit him, which means had he been able to quit at the top of his game, he may not have suffered from Parkinson's, because he could put his hands down and you still couldn't hit him. One other point, this week I read in the letters to the editor, someone wrote, begrudgingly, because last weekend the media coverage was overwhelming and given to this cowardly draft dodger, end of quote, and that characterization is wrong on both counts. One, he did not dodge the draft. He registered and he reported as directed by his draft board, and then he refused to step forward and take the oath, knowing the consequences. Draft dodgers didn't do that. They went to Canada, or they used family influence to get into the National Guard, or they used tricks to flunk the medical exam. He did not dodge the draft. He claimed religious conscientious objector status, and that's allowed. Just ask the Amish or the Quakers. The second point, refusing to join was not the path of cowardice. In refusing, he subjected himself to prosecution, possible prison time, and he knew that. Yet if he had gone into the military, he would have been likely a morale officer. He would have made training films. He would have visited the troops. Easy duty. So it wasn't cowardice, and he most certainly did not dodge the draft. All right, there was also weather to talk about last weekend. You likely saw the pictures of the historic flooding in Texas. And I think it was 9 soldiers from Fort Hood were killed when their vehicle, big armored vehicle, was tipped over by the floodwaters. And one of them was from around here. Her obituary was just in the paper a couple days ago. And while not life-threatening, it certainly was bizarre last week. Portland, Oregon, getting over 100 degrees. You know, it so rarely gets hot there in Seattle and much of the Pacific Northwest. Not many people have air conditioning. Ooh, over 100 degrees. And I'd also planned to announce to you last week that finally, Tropical Storm Bonnie, which came to us 2 weeks ago, and it hung around nearly all that week, just sitting off the North Carolina coast for days and days and days. It wasn't a huge storm, and it caused me no great worries. It was showery and gray skies all week, but then finally, the news was it was moving away. And I mean, Bonnie hung out like she was in a bar waiting for someone to buy her a drink. And then finally, we were promised a good long stretch of good weather. And just like that, it changed. Because in a moment's notice again, and within a day, there was a new tropical storm, Colin, which formed in the Gulf of Mexico. And then it wasn't stationary. It raced up through Florida and Georgia and back to the East Coast. And again, thunder showers and wind and rain. And I lucked out. We had 1 or 2 days of 100% chance of precipitation, chance of heavy thunderstorms, but only saw dark clouds on one of those days, so pretty good. Oh, and Colin did race by. As slow as Bonnie moved, so quickly did Colin move, and ultimately in the same direction. It was as though he wanted to catch Bonnie and buy her the drink. All right, so now over 2 weeks ago, but I'd also intended to tell you this remarkable story. It's been 42 years since he presented the technique that he invented and the American Medical Association named after him. Who him? Dr. Henry Heimlich. Before the Heimlich maneuver, lots of people died from choking. You know, food goes down the wrong pipe. We've all done that with a sip of water. Terrible, terrible feeling. But if it's a piece of food, and you can't breathe, you lose consciousness. And even if someone calls an ambulance and they're across the street, it still might be a minute or two before they get there, and another couple minutes to get to the hospital. It used to be fairly common. It was known as a cafe coronary. The great first baseman, Jimmy Fox, died from choking. But Dr. Heimlich came up with the procedure. You've probably seen it. You come behind the person, you put your fist in their gut, you give a sharp pull, and that squeeze the diaphragm. The air that is in your lungs violently is expelled, pushing the food out. And, you know, if you're in a restaurant and you're choking, there's a good chance, assuming that there are other people there, that someone knows how to do it. Clint Eastwood saved someone's life performing a Heimlich maneuver just 2 years ago. Still, all these years later, Dr. Heimlich, who is now 96 and lives in a retirement home in Cincinnati, he was eating in the dining room, and at the next table there was a woman with the exact symptoms, so he did what he taught others to do, and in the process saved her life. What's remarkable, for the record, he'd never actually used it in an emergency. His son later said that, well, lots of people had told his dad that they had used it or had had it used on them. That was the first time he did. Good job, Doc. All right, a couple of quickies. First, I'd intended to mention last week that Monday was the 72nd anniversary of D-Day. There's nothing to add to the gravity of the date. I'll simply remind that last year, I got to hold in my hand a vial that contained actual sand from Omaha Beach. And my friend who was there also discovered these two shells, obviously fired that day in 1944. One an American shell, the other German, and I held them. Let me tell you that nothing prepares you for the feeling of holding the hallowed in your own hands. And I was saddened to learn that Jonathan Goldsmith has lost his job. Now, that's not news. It was announced almost 3 months ago, but I just found out about it. Who's Jonathan Goldsmith? He's an actor, and he's being replaced. You know, maybe they can't replace him, really. They say they're going to reboot the character. And, of course, that's happened with James Bond a number of times, but everybody knows their names: Sean Connery, Roger Moore. You know, who's Jonathan Goldsmith? Well, you've seen him on Facebook. And if you're still asking who's Jonathan Goldsmith, why, he's the actor who's played the most interesting man in the world. And now Dos Equis says they're going to replace him. Stay thirsty, my friends. Oh, and we should say, belatedly, happy NA to Barbara Bush. The former First Lady turned 91 on Wednesday. Many happy returns, Mrs. Bush. Many happy returns. All right, now for one last quickie. It's sort of an animal tale. From time to time, especially when I thought them cute, I've shown you Stephen Pastis' cartoon, Pearls Before Swine. I was going to show you this last week, but it was from 2 weeks ago on Sunday, and it really... All right, so anyway, pig starts. Hey, Benny the Bull, how goes it? Well, good. I'm learning how to impress women. How so? With this book, The Nose Ring Dare, it's all these crazy things you can do with nose rings, and women love it. It looks like you've highlighted a lot of it. Oh, yeah, all the important parts. But this is just the one I've read. You have other copies? Yep. I have this unread version as well. I keep it in case anything should ever happen to the read one. God forbid. Now, Rat speaks. Dude, don't you think you're going a little overboard? It's a stupid book. That's rude, Rat. Be polite. Oh, would it be polite or rude of me to stand on the top of the read version? All right, so then, in the next to last frame, which I'm not going to read aloud. So did you get it? In all honesty, I did not. Not until I got to the final frame. Then went back to the next to the last frame and read it again, this time aloud. Yes. Rude, off the red nose ring there. My puns are timeless. Hey, let me tell you about my book, Shrink. Or wait, I can let others do it. All right, so welcome back. Remember, you can write to us at thebrucechannel@yahoo.com and see all of our previous shows at tinyurl.com/brucechannel. If you go there, you can subscribe, and you can see all of our shows also at our Facebook page. Okay, so it is unavoidable. I'd hope to only touch on it, but it's like the tar baby. You get in a little bit, and the events mandate getting a little more and more and more. And of course, I mean the election. Primary season is all but over. D.C. votes on Tuesday. But as Donald Trump did a few weeks ago, now Hillary Clinton has the official designation of presumptive nominee. She has more than enough delegates. And as is true for both, nothing is actually official. Nothing is assured until they actually vote. Beyond the issues, though, and all the dirt in the campaign, imagine you were born in, say, 1870. The Civil War had just ended. Street lights burned whale oil. Out west, the great cattle drives were at their zenith. Telephones hadn't yet been invented. And then in 1920, you turned a modest 50 years old. The Great War had just ended. There are electric lights, electric street cars. Telephones are no longer fantasy. And radio is just around the corner. And there are horseless carriages. There are flying machines. And women can vote. One lifetime, merely 50 years, and that's a large sweep of history. So when I reflect, and I am sometimes contemplative, I feel a little like I'm witnessing that kind of sweep of history. Prop planes to jet engines and rockets and moon landings. Human beings walking on a celestial body that is not Earth. Radio is important, but it gives way to television, then television to the internet, to instant and practically free face-to-face communication via FaceTime or Skype. And in politics, the impossible happened. A black man was not only nominated by a major party, but he won the presidency. Now, both major parties have nominated a woman for vice president, but assuming no lightning bolts, Hillary Clinton will have broken all the precedent, a major party nominating a woman. And it is not a political judgment of any sort to take time to reflect on the historical significance. And regardless of whether she was aided by the Democratic machine and the debate schedule, it is also true that despite all the negativity, she got more millions of votes than Bernie and, in fact, captured more primary votes than any other presidential candidate ever. Now, it's true that Donald received more primary votes than any other Republican candidate ever, which ought to set up a classic contest. But instead, remember that sweep of history thing? A sweep of history ought to invoke a sense of grandeur, being alive during something unprecedented, and, like walking on the moon. And yet this one, Donald makes this one seem more and more petty. I'd intended last week to mention his outrageous comments about California's drought. He said there's no drought, and he'd simply turn it on. Turn what on? The rain? But I might have had to change that because by week's end, things going on. His Trump University is being sued, class action suit in California. By the way, the New York Attorney General is investigating that toward fraud. And I heard the Attorney General speak. Wow. Nevertheless, the judge at the class action suit in California, Trump says can't be fair. Why can't he be fair? Because the judge was born in Indiana, back home in Indiana, but he's of Mexican ancestry. And he can't be fair because Trump wants to build a wall. So, just as many leading Republicans were kind of endorsing him, not all had. Now it's beginning to go the other way. They are unendorsing him, led perhaps by Senator Lindsey Graham. And he said something like, sometimes love of country has to override hate of Hillary. In Iowa, a state senator, David Johnson, has suspended his membership in the Republican primary, or rather in the Republican Party, because of Trump, saying, and I quote, "I will not stand silent if the party of Lincoln and the end of slavery buckles under the racial bias of a bigot." End of quote. But here's the thing, the Republican Party is a private club. True enough, they'd like to expand their membership, not limit it, but it is a private club. And they can make their own rules in the same way that a private club can legally be men only. So it is not impossible. It would have to be their first order of business, but it is possible. They could change the rules, making the first ballot, even the second ballot, they could call it whatever they want. Non-binding polls, advisories, whatever. And then they could free the pledged delegates after that to vote for whomever. So that is not impossible. Whom would they nominate if they did that? Well, Ted Cruz got the second most votes. But the Republicans hate him almost as much as Trump. John Kasich is everybody's idea of a nice guy, but he only won one state, and that was his own. Chris Christie could have had the nomination 4 years ago. But after Bridgegate and being the first one to endorse Trump, that won't fly. Mitt Romney? Maybe. But if all of that happened, then what happens to the party? Remember, Trump got more votes than any other Republican ever. And although so far none of the outrageous things he said or done, not Carly's face, not the handicapped reporter, not my African American, has made any difference. But if the Republican elders decide they simply cannot have the party represented by Donald Trump, then what happens to all those voters more than voted for any other Republican in history? Don't know. But you got to remember history. Remember the Whigs and the Know-Nothings? No, I don't remember them personally either, but I know they existed. And sometimes, even if something has existed all of our lives, nothing is forever. All right, so somewhere around a year ago, I showed you a map that showed what each state had the most of per capita. Some weren't surprising, like Florida having the most shark bites. While others were a bit surprising, like Kansas having the most web searches for porn. Well, today, another map. Similar but a completely different view. What we found was a map that shows what question is most Googled in each state. And some of these will surprise, and some not. And it's probably what we should have expected. So we'll start with Kansas. Not to pick on Kansas. I just thought the porn thing in straight-laced Kansas was probably one of the least expected in that other map. And this surprises almost as much. And again, I'm really not picking on Kansas, but we will start in the heartland. Not to pick on Kansas, but it is Kansas after all that brought us Congressman Ron Pompeo, author of the Dark Act. Anyway, what question is most Googled in Kansas? How to make meth. Really? All right, and even though the issue is on one hand settled, and on the other hand unimportant, one state south in Oklahoma, they are still asking if Obama is Muslim. From there, go east. Yes, the state that brought us William Jefferson Clinton, the state that seceded from the Union in May of 1861. The folks there most want to know who won the Civil War. Or, as it's likely also known, especially in the southern states, the wall between the states. All right, frightening as it may be to contemplate that not being known in Arkansas, I'd not recommend against, but I'd at least consider whether or not to go north from there, because in Missouri, the most Googled question is, am I a psycho? Well, that's not an indictment of the Show Me State. What if I learn your last name is Bates and you run a hotel? I'm getting the hell out of town. All right. In neighboring Tennessee, they want to know, what's the clap? They ought to know that. They got a lot of clapping going on at the Grand Ole Opry, don't they? All right. What is a clap is a legitimate question. But I am floored by Kentucky. How to make a baby? Hey, Martha, how do we make? And then just to the north, my original home state. Ohio. And New Jersey, they don't have a lot in common, but New Jersey asks, if weed is bad for you, will be if Chris Christie finds you've got it. And in Ohio, they want to know if it's legal. As of this week, medical marijuana, yes. Oh, and then next to Ohio is West Virginia. And there, the most often question is, when is Cinco de Mayo? Now, that may seem funny, but it isn't. It makes perfect sense. Of all 50 states, West Virginia has the smallest Latino percentage of its population, just over 1%. Now, if you don't have a lot of Spanish speakers, but you hear the term, yeah, it would make sense. That would be a question a lot of people would have. You've heard or seen the slogan, Virginia is for lovers. Well, Virginians themselves don't know why that is, which is probably still better than being in Florida where paranoia seems to reign. Why does everybody hate us? Head north from Florida, and no, I do not know why your nipples are sore. I might, or not, be willing to help you find out. If you're in South Carolina, these Google searches are obviously not taking place from your phone. And here at home in North Carolina, how do we open that jar? That's actually misleading. It's a very misleading statistic. It would be enormously easy to infer that here in North Carolina, the home of NASCAR, which originated when moonshiners raced their stock cars, you'd be incorrect to conclude that we don't know how to open a damn jar. We do. But after we get the first one open, we sort of forget. I can relate to Utah. It was only a year ago I learned what quinoa was. In Wyoming, they wonder, what is Wyoming? All right, so Google the map and find other fun ones, but there is one place I've been, but I may forevermore avoid, and that is in Delaware. It seems that in our first state, the overriding question is how to get away with murder. And I can hope for you that you avoid that fate. I hope that I avoid that fate, and moreover, I hope that your upcoming week is the best one you've ever had.